The hall was impeccably decorated, with warm lights reflecting off the white tablecloths and arrangements of yellow flowers that seemed to smile at everyone who entered. It was one of those traditional restaurants, where the dark wood gave an air of old-world elegance, and every detail seemed laden with stories. The chairs were arranged around a long table, reserved exclusively for that very special moment, the retirement dinner of a man who had dedicated more than 30 years of his life to the same company. His colleagues were there, some with broad smiles full of nostalgia, others more emotional, still trying to accept that this would be the last event with him present as a member of the team. The atmosphere was one of celebration, but also of farewell. Plates clinked, laughter mingled with the soft sound of the piano in the background, and even the waiter seemed kinder that night. The retiree, a simple man with a kind gaze and hands marked by decades of silent effort, couldn't hide his pride. He observed everything with a shy smile, as if trying to hold every second within his heart. For many years, he had believed that perhaps this moment would never come, and now, there he was, surrounded by people who had witnessed his daily dedication, his sacrifices, his small gestures that were rarely seen. But above all, there was one presence he had awaited all night: his son. Even with their somewhat distant relationship in recent years, he wanted to believe that this day would be a new beginning. His son arrived late, with hurried steps and an impatient expression, but the father didn't mind. He simply offered a smile that carried automatic forgiveness. He had always hoped that life would give his son what he himself never had: more freedom, more opportunities, more paths. And perhaps that's why, because he loved so much, he gave in too much, remained silent too often, accepted being ignored too many times. After some fun toasts, old stories, and generous laughter, the master of ceremonies announced it was the family's turn to speak. The retiree adjusted himself in his chair, proudly looking at his son, as if expecting a hug that had been decades in the making. Everyone at the table fell silent, attentive. The son stood up slowly, picked up his glass, and cleared his throat, as if about to give a heartfelt speech. The father straightened his posture. His heart raced. He thought, "Now's the time. My boy is going to say he's proud of me." But what came out of his mouth was not love. It wasn't gratitude. It wasn't recognition. Those 5 words pierced the father's heart like an invisible knife. "You don't matter anymore." The entire table stopped. The waiter froze mid-step. The piano sound seemed to miss a note. It was as if the world had held its breath. The retiree stood motionless, eyes wide and glass suspended in mid-air. The shy smile that had once lit up his face vanished like sand slipping through his fingers. That sentence wasn't just harsh. It was a declaration of dismissal, a cruel warning that, for his own son, that man's value had expired along with his career. The silence that followed was heavy. Some guests looked away. Others shook their heads in disapproval. Dad tried to understand if it had been a joke, irony, a poorly chosen phrase. But his son's cold, impatient gaze said it all. He really meant those words. And in that instant, the man realized something that hurts any heart. Sometimes, those we love most are the ones who hurt us the most. Not because they want to, but because they never saw how much it cost to get to where we are today. The retiree felt a burning sensation in his chest. Shame, sadness, confusion. Everything mingled like an impossible knot to untie. He slowly lowered his glass, trying to hide his trembling hands. His colleagues, who had so often seen him face crises at the company with calm and courage, now watched him, unable to help him. It was too painful to witness a father being broken in front of his own son. And here, the inevitable connection with the viewer comes in. How many times have you dedicated yourself to someone, given your all, put them first, and in the end, felt discarded as if nothing had meant anything? This is the kind of pain that doesn't appear on the body, but scars the soul. The vulnerability of that man, exposed before everyone, touched anyone who has ever felt invisible to someone important. And paradoxically, it was this pain that would begin to transform the entire story of that night. Because while the father tried to mend his own heart, another man, quiet until then, was preparing to rise. A man who knew truths that his son could never imagine. The night was far from over. In fact, it was about to begin. While those heavy words still echoed in the retiree's mind, something inside him began to open doors that had been closed for many years. It was as if the impact of the phrase, "You don't matter anymore," had triggered an old film full of forgotten scenes, stored deep in his memory. And in that brief silence of dinner, his life passed like a flashback, slow, painful, and full of sacrifices that no one there had ever imagined. He found himself young again, arriving at work before sunrise. The cool morning air whipped against his face as he walked to the factory, the same factory where he would work for over 3 decades. It was a simple job in the eyes of many, but for him it meant dignity. It meant putting food on the table, paying for school, buying medicine, and, above all, ensuring that his son would never face the hardships he had faced. The next scene was him leaving late at night, tired, but carrying in his pocket a drawing by his son, something the boy had done at school. He kept each drawing as if it were a treasure. None of his colleagues understood why he smiled even after 12 hours of hard work. The answer was simple. Everything he did for that boy who, at that dinner, had just said that he no longer mattered. In the flashback, it becomes clear that he rarely rested. When he wasn't working, he was fixing something around the house, preparing a simple surprise for his son, or going to school meetings where few parents showed up. He was the kind of father who stayed in the back of the room, receiving no praise but always present. Always. His world revolved around that boy. But despite all this dedication, within his own home he was often underestimated. His family, accustomed to his quiet routine, never understood the magnitude of the responsibilities he carried. His wife, although she respected him, sometimes let slip comments like, "You live for that job." And the son, still young, grew up hearing this. He grew up seeing his father leaving early and returning late. He grew up without understanding that, while he slept peacefully, his father struggled daily to maintain that peace. And this incomplete view, over the years, transformed his father into something distorted in the boy's mind, someone who was always busy, always tired, always away. Gradually, the son began to believe that his father was just another unimportant employee, an ordinary, predictable man, without any great achievements. He knew nothing about the challenges faced within the company, about the crises his father helped resolve, about the ideas that saved entire departments. To the son, his father was simply his father, an ordinary, replaceable, invisible figure. But the truth was quite different. Within the company, that quiet man carried enormous weight. He was the type of employee who was never absent, never late, and always remained calm when everything seemed to be falling apart. He was the one who, on one occasion, noticed a fault in the main machine and prevented an accident that could have cost lives. He was the one who spent 3 whole days reviewing reports to prevent the company from losing a multi-million-dollar contract. He was the one who helped train generations of young employees who now held high-level positions, including some who were at that dinner, looking at him with admiration. But at home, none of that was mentioned. He never wore medals, never displayed praise, never talked about his achievements. He thought it didn't matter. He thought that simply loving his son and being present was enough. He never realized that, by hiding his victories, he ended up allowing his own family to believe that he didn't have any. And the son grew up with the idea that his father was just another cog in the machine of a large company, a man of routine, without brilliance, without impact. As a teenager, he even mocked, "Dad, you work so hard, and you're still in the same place. Is this life?" That phrase had hurt at the time, but the father let it go. He always let it go. He always believed that love was more important than recognition. He always thought that time would heal everything. But time, instead of bringing them closer, created a silent chasm. At the retirement dinner table, while reminiscing about all of this, the retiree realized that the distance between them hadn't been built overnight. It was a slow construction, made of misunderstandings, lack of communication, and above all, invisibility. He had been a silent hero, and silent heroes are rarely recognized by their own children. The son, sitting across the table, still believed he was right. To him, his father had been an employee who dedicated his life to his work and therefore didn't matter anymore. He had no idea that this man, whom he saw as ordinary and outdated, had been fundamental in crucial moments for the company. But fate has curious ways of revealing the truth, because while the father was sinking into himself, trying to absorb the pain of those words, someone discreetly raised their hand at the end of the table. A man of firm posture, a confident gaze, and a respectable presence. Someone who knew the father's true story. Someone who had witnessed sacrifices and achievements that the son could never have imagined. And this is where the tension begins to rise, because everything the son believed in was about to be destroyed. But at that dinner, a man would stand up to reveal a truth that would change everything. The silence was still thick when the former boss began to rise. It wasn't a sudden movement, nor overly dramatic, but the entire table noticed. He rested his hands on the polished wood, straightened his back slowly, and raised his gaze, letting his eyes meet those of the retiree. His expression carried something rare, profound respect mixed with genuine emotion. He was a man known for his serious, always impeccable, always firm, almost intimidating demeanor. And precisely for that reason, when he opened his mouth to speak, even the piano in the background seemed to lower its volume. "I need to say a few words," he began, his voice deep and firm, but choked in a way that few there had ever heard before. Everyone turned, their attention to him. The son, who was still staring at the plate as if he wanted to disappear into it, looked up in surprise. After all, this was the former director of the company, one of the most respected names among them all. The boss took a deep breath, as if he were about to carry on his shoulders not just an honor, but a revelation that the whole world needed to hear. "I worked with this man for 32 years, he said, pointing to the retiree, "and I can say, without fear of being wrong, that he was one of the silent pillars of our company. A man who never asked for recognition, never asked for a raise, never raised his voice, but his loyalty," he paused. "His loyalty sustained more lives than many people imagine." The table remained motionless. The son's eyes widened, unable to hide his astonishment. The former boss continued, "When everyone else left at 5 in the afternoon, he was the one who stayed. When a problem arose big enough to cause panic, he was the one who kept calm. When a mistake threatened to cost millions, he was the one who spent sleepless nights trying to find a solution. And he never, ever asked for credit for any of it." The boss then placed his hand on the retiree's shoulder, a gesture that spoke volumes. "This man saved the company at times you wouldn't even imagine," she said, looking directly at her son. The retiree looked at his boss with genuine surprise. He hadn't expected those stories to be revealed there. He had always believed his role was simply to do what was necessary, nothing more. But his former boss was just getting started. "Allow me to tell you something that few here know," he said, raising his voice slightly. 10 years ago, we faced a crisis that would have shut down half the company and left hundreds of families without income. A flaw in the production system was causing serious errors, and we didn't have time. There was no solution. The experts had given up. I myself was already prepared to announce a mass layoff." The son leaned forward, as if his body on its own was searching for the truth he had never known. "But the boss pointed to his father again, "he stayed locked inside the factory for 3 days. He slept on the floor, ate whatever he found, and reviewed the old system line by line, something no engineer wanted to do. And at the end of the night on the 3rd day, he found the flaw that nobody thought existed. The fix he made saved hundreds of jobs. Hundreds." A murmur immediately swept across the table. No one there seemed to know about the story. The son put his hand to his mouth, as if trying to contain the shame that rose to his face. "That wasn't all," the chief continued. "In a fire in Sector B years ago, while everyone was rushing to evacuate, he went back alone to check if any employees were trapped. He found an unconscious intern behind a machine, carried him in his arms, and got out seconds before the ceiling collapsed. The firefighters said that if he had taken 3 more seconds, he would have died. The son stood frozen. His mind seemed to spin in a whirlwind of guilt, regret, and bewilderment. He never imagined his father could have done something so grand. He never imagined anything. But the boss wasn't finished. And finally, he said with an emotional smile, "I want everyone to know something else. This man, whom many consider quiet and ordinary, was the mentor of dozens of employees. He taught, advised, helped, and always did so, quietly. Many who now hold high positions are only where they are because they learned directly from him." The silence at the table was now different. It wasn't discomfort, it was reverence. The boss took a deep breath before concluding, "And that's why hearing someone say that he doesn't matter anymore was one of the most unfair things I've ever witnessed in my life. Because if there's anyone in this room who matters, it's him, and he always has." The words echoed through the hall like thunder. For a second, nobody moved, and then, slowly, someone began to clap, then another and another. In a few seconds, the entire table was on its feet. Colleagues, former supervisors, friends, newer employees, all applauding the man who had always felt his worth was hidden. It was a long, emotional, and genuine round of applause. The retiree brought his hand to his face, trying to hold back the tears that insisted on escaping. He had never felt so seen, so recognized, so important. Meanwhile, the son remained seated, his head bowed, his face red. He couldn't stand up. He couldn't look his father in the eye, because for the first time in his life, he realized the magnitude of the injustice he had committed. And in that embarrassed silence of his, there was something powerful, the beginning of change. The applause lingered for a while. It was the kind that doesn't just come from the hands, but from the heart. It was a recognition that had endured decades of silence, sacrifice, and humility. When the sound finally began to fade, the father took a deep breath, trying to process everything he never imagined he would hear. He had always done what was right, not what brought him visibility. And now he was there, before everyone, recognized for something he had always done in anonymity. But as the applause subsided, another movement was taking place, slow, almost timid, but laden with meaning. The son, who had remained seated until then, finally stood up. His eyes were brimming with tears, his hands trembled, and the weight of guilt seemed to make him smaller than he actually was. He took a deep breath as if trying to swallow an impossible knot, and began to walk towards his father. Each step was a mixture of regret and revelation. All his life, he had seen his father as an ordinary person, someone simple, predictable, who lived for his work and rarely spoke about himself. He never imagined that behind that simplicity lay strength, courage, and stories, worthy of a biography. He never imagined that this silent man had carried lives on his shoulders, literally and metaphorically. When he got close to his father, the son couldn't speak right away. His voice faltered. His eyes welled up even more. He tried to start, but the emotion seemed to prevent the air from leaving his lungs. "Dad," he finally managed to murmur with difficulty. I had no idea." The father looked at him tenderly. That look that only someone who truly loves can sustain. A mixture of compassion, understanding, and a slight sadness for the wounds already inflicted. He said nothing. He waited. The son took another deep breath and tried to continue. "I judged you. I judged you my whole life without knowing anything. I thought you were just—" Her voice faltered again. "Just an ordinary employee. I thought you had no dreams, no achievements, that you had nothing to teach." The father maintained a steady gaze, but his eyes shone, not with pride, but with humanity. "I was wrong about you," the son confessed, finally letting the tears fall. "I said horrible things, things that should never have come out of my mouth. I said you didn't matter. He swallowed his sobs. "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry, Dad." The entire room watched the scene in absolute silence, as if they were witnessing the exact moment when two lives reconnected after years of emotional distance. The father then placed his hand on his son's shoulder, a simple gesture, but one that carried forgiveness, maturity, and a lifetime of love. He took a deep breath before replying, his voice low and calm. Son, I've always loved you. Always. But your words, they hurt. They hurt because they come from the person we love most. They hurt because deep down we hope to be seen, even without asking for anything. He gently squeezed his son's shoulder. I don't hold a grudge, but I want you to understand. Words have weight. They can lift someone up or destroy them. The son lowered his head, crying silently. It was the first time in years that he had truly felt small, not in a humiliating way, but in a humble way. He needed to hear that. The father continued, now in a softer voice. I never needed recognition, but knowing that you never saw who I really was, that always hurt. Not because I wanted applause, but because I wanted you to be proud of me. The son slowly raised his eyes, and in them was a desperate plea for forgiveness, but also a promise, never again to be blind to the value of those who loved him. I'm proud, Dad. Very. It's just that I only realized it too late, he said, with brutal sincerity. The father smiled, a tired but genuine smile. It's never too late when you're willing to change, he replied. That's when they embraced. It wasn't a quick hug, nor a formal one. It was one of those long hugs that bridge years of distance, hidden hurts, and unspoken words. The kind of hug that rebuilds bridges. The kind of hug that heals. Some guests discreetly wiped away tears. Others smiled, moved. The former boss watched the scene with deep respect, perhaps knowing that this moment was even more significant than all the praise he had uttered minutes before. When they finally parted ways, the father looked at everyone around him and said, his voice firm but full of feeling, often we admire heroes we've never met, when the real hero is sitting in our own home. The phrase echoed, sinking deep into the minds of everyone present. It was a harsh truth, but a necessary one. How many times do we ignore those who truly love us? How many times do we choose to be blind to the greatness of the people who walk with us every day? How many times do we only value them after we've lost them? And at that dinner, the lesson was clearer than ever. Value those who love you before it's too late. The light seemed softer. The atmosphere, once heavy with tension, was now filled with something different. Reconciliation, understanding, renewed love. That father's story left a mark, not only on his son, who learned that pride and ignorance can blind us, but also on everyone who heard his story. A powerful reminder that the greatest heroes don't always wear capes, medals, or high positions. Sometimes they wear old work boots and have calloused hands, and yet they support the world of those they love. If this story touched you, leave a comment telling us what moved you the most, and share the video with someone who also needs to learn to value those around them. Subscribe for more powerful stories like this one.